Good morning, everybody. Gunnar here. Today we're going to go over the Marabou Minnow. I'm kind of doing this one by a little bit of request, and I got a smallmouth trip coming up, and I kind of want to have some. So, it goes twofold. But the Marabou Minnow is an articulated, kind of got a hidden conehead on it, so I guess it's a jiggy fly. Yeah, it's just a marabou bait fish, Marabou Minnow, right? It's inspired by Kelly Gallup's conehead barely legal, so it's kind of like a smaller jiggy bait fish. I think I'll probably say that quite a few times. So that's what it kind of came from. I kind of combined it with John McClure's Kill Whitey fly, which is just a freaking boss of a fly, and I changed it quite a few times to kind of make it my own. And yeah, so what you need is some strung Chinese saddle hackles. That's going to be our tail. We'll do some UV Polish chenille in silver going up the body. It's going to be marabou winged, obviously Marabou Minnow, right? And then we're going to palmer a body of an EP sparkle brush with an EP foxy brush. The foxy brushes, they obviously have the EP fiber, which builds a lot of bulk and density. And then they also have the kind of foxy guard hairs for length and a little bit of movement, and it builds a lot more bulk than the EP craft fur brush does, so that's kind of nice. Stack some more, and then we'll do the head. So yeah, I should stop talking by now. The tail. Strung Chinese saddle hackles, right? Now basically, I put these on here, cut them to length. I'm going to take the two concavities and face them together, so the feathers are facing each other. You know how they're cupped? The two cups are facing each other. Now the stem on these is, it's not round, but it's pinched, and it's pinched perpendicular to the displacement of the feather. So if you tie this on the side of the hook, your feather is going to rotate, and it's going to be very frustrating. The way to make these go in straight, we're going to tie them in on the top. If you find a feather that doesn't want to do that, you can take the stem, put them in your scissors, and help flatten them. So you're flattening them in the same direction they're already flattened, but you're just reinforcing that. And then you tie those directly on top. Now your feathers are going to hold their vertical shape. And I think I have the concavity of one of these wrong. So, watch me tie it in twice. But catch those with a loose wrap right on top. Wrap that backwards. And now you got two vertical feathers, right? Now I like to use feathers that are wide enough to carry some bulk backwards, but are relatively transparent. You can see through them, they're light, right? I'm not using really big, thick, slopping feathers, which are perfectly acceptable. I just like to use a little bit lighter feather. This is a smaller baitfish pattern, and it's going to help this flash kind of come through those feathers. So we're going to take two strands of just holographic Flashabou. We're going to double that back around the bobbin. And then I'm just going to take two of those strands and cut them short, and two strands at full length. Now the body is UV Polish chenille, plain and simple, right? It's going to help build a little bit of bulk. Obviously it's slashy. To tie that in, I just trimmed off the end, so I have bare kind of nylon cord that I'm catching here. Help that from getting pulled out. Put some good wraps on that and come forward. And I'm going to leave about 2 hook eyes, 1.5 hook eyes left on that shank to stack all my marabou. And then I always double that back and tie it in over top of itself so it can't get pulled out. So, I have had quite a few questions from people on what kind of marabou I use. Now, this is absolutely nothing special. It's just strung blood quill marabou. That's all it is. Strung blood quill marabou. But what I do is when I stack this, I don't tie it in on the stem like this, because I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way the stem goes back. So what I do is I take my marabou fibers, I preen them off of the stem like that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just going to put that down on the table. I'm going to take the marabou from the other side of the feather, and I'm going to stack those on top of each other. And so I have a stemless cluster of marabou, right? And that's how I tie it in. Now I want this to be close to the length of that hackle, because we're going to have a second wing that's going to come up on top of this, and it's going to give us good taper, right? And one thing that happens is when you preen it off, you get a lot of unevenness in your tips. It doesn't quite move the same as when it's on the stem, but it carries a little bit better silhouette. So that's good. I like that. So I matched it up, took all my butts, clipped them off, and then I'm going to catch these around my hook, put some good hard wraps on there, and then what I like to do is you take your thumb and you shove your thumbnail into the end of that, and it's going to spread that around that hook, so you got marabou kind of going all over. It's all over the top, not on the bottom, right? So it's basically halved perfectly, which is what your thumbnail does to it. Alright, putting in the front hook. The front hook is a size 1 attitude streamer hook from Partridge Hooks. I slipped a large brass cone head on here, and I'm going to run my thread up to it. We're going to put a nice little, I don't know, thread on the hook. That way we got something for our articulation wire to grab onto. And I forgot to mention that back hook is an Ahrex Hooks. It's a size 4 light stinger hook, Nordic Salt light stinger hook. So I'm coming up here now. We're going to put our articulation wire on here. I haven't showed an articulation in a while. And what I want is that wire, basically I need to have enough room to put my head on here, right, and fill that with dubbing. So I'm just measuring off of my wire where that cone head's going to seat up against. And I quite like where it is. Wrapping that down, right, putting some straight pulls with a straight bobbin on there to compress that nylon on top of that wire so it stays nice and secure. Now, one thing to consider when you're doing this fly is the hook sizes are relatively important, because basically we're only doing 2 stack locations of marabou, so the fly is limited by the length of marabou that you use, right? If you have, this marabou is probably 1.5 inches long, well, I can't tie my next stack, 2 inches forward, or else there's going to be a weird air gap. So you need to be aware of the size hook that you're using when you're doing this fly. So this is again a number 4 in the back and a number 1. The 4 is a light stinger hook from Ahrex Hooks, and the front's a number 1 attitude streamer. You can also do a number 2 attitude streamer in the back. That works out pretty good. Once you take that front hook up into like a 1/0 or a 2/0, the bug gets a little out of proportion, and you got to change your recipe to meet your new dimensions. So my 2 wires are going to act as basically a material dam behind the cone head, so the cone head can't slide too far backwards. And I'm going to strap that down, and I'm going to put a little thread bump back here so it can't slide over. And that's good. And then we're going to whip finish. Sorry, marabou, I trapped you. And then I'm going to put a thread dam in front of my cone so that my cone, that was fun. Get all that out of there. So that my cone can't slide forward. Because the first couple of times I tried doing this, I forgot this thread dam up here, and I crowded my eye and I couldn't fit everything over, and it became very frustrating very quickly. So I'm just going to throw a thread dam up in front of that so that cone head can't slide around. And then I'm going to whip finish again and super glue all this. Just like on the Super Jerk video, right, we're going to simultaneously palmer 2 brushes. I have the Foxy brush as the leading edge, kind of hiding the flash from the EP Sparkle brush, which is a holographic silver, obviously. And then we're going to take some raw ends, right, we trim the fibers away so that we're catching the wire here from the dubbing brush, tie that in, Make sure that's nice and secure, and then I'm going to leave. You can go pretty close right up to that cone head. It's not going to be a big deal because we're going to stack our marabou on top of that, but good enough. And then I take some old hackle pliers. They're kind of beat up. I grab both those wire ends and hold those in place. So that's our body. This is our bulk, this is our flash, this is our taper and our silhouette. The marabou is not going to carry a lot of that bulk. The marabou is mostly going to be kind of this movement, color, and basically that's about it actually. Movement and color. But this is a lot of our friction, a lot of our water drag. It's going to be everything. This is everything to this fly. Booyah. So now we're going to stack some marabou up here. I'm running out of thread, so I'm going to half hitch occasionally. So for the front, I like to do kind of a long, not so bulky marabou plume, and then a little bit bulkier, thicker marabou plume. We're going to put the long one on first. This is going to be our wing material that comes back and bleeds into this so that we have good kind of color transition and a good silhouette and taper from our tip material, right? The tips of the marabou kind of need to bleed into one another, and then we're going to take that thicker one and kind of build a forward leaning taper of denser marabou going up towards the cone head. And that is done. Booyah. Now we're going to put probably one stack. It depends on how thick my marabou is, because this is already white and shiny and silvery, right? And I want that to bleed through this marabou so that it's a nice kind of flashy underbelly. So I don't want to put a super dense marabou plume, like 2 stacks of white on the bottom, because it's going to cover all that up, and that's already bulky enough anyway. So I'm going to put some taper into this, because I'm only going to do this 1 stack, so I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of move them. I'm just going to move my fingers around, and that's going to give me some uneven tips, so that when I stack this, I have a greater range of tip exposure. I'm going to measure it off the top so it's not longer than the top. So now I have a slightly denser amount of marabou on top, leaning forward taper, good color transition, silhouette from the 2 brushes supporting all my marabou. And I have a massive thread bump behind this cone head, which is all going to get hidden, by the way. Now I'm going to come in with some grizzly flutter legs. These are mostly for lateral line. You can use something a little bit flashier if you want, but I quite enjoy these. They got good movement to them. They're not round, they're a nice flattened leg. And I like the grizzly stripes for lateral lines and also for kind of modeling across the back, especially if you were to do this in like a juvenile rainbow or something, right? Almost all trout have dots on the back, and this grizzly effect is kind of perfect for that. And we're going to whip finish right up top behind this cone head. Now something that I'm a fan of, right, is I like to carry kind of the flash of a fly up into the front, up into the belly section where the fish is kind of the roundest, right? I think you get a little bit more reflectance up there, and I like shiny backs. So what we're going to do is, before we put this head on here, which is it's a hidden cone head, right? This is something like, well, I don't know if I came up with it. I got the idea from Oscar Hagelin. He's got a beef jerky fly, which is a weighted cone head fly with a dubbing head over top of the cone head. But what we're going to do is we're going to throw a fish mask, a number 7 fish mask over top of this cone to hide everything. And the new well, I don't know if they're new anymore, but the fish masks are now flexible. If you haven't checked them out in a while, they're flexible, so you can deform them elastically and they'll return to their original shape. So what happens is they absorb the shock from eats and from smacking them on rocks, and they don't break. So these are kind of an awesome new little product here. Way more durable and a lot of fun to tie with. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some ice dub shimmer fringe in peacock green to match our greenback, right? And we're just going to put a really sparse layer of this over top of that marabou to give this a slightly reflectant back. I don't like to overdo it. We're going to take this. I like to preen out any loose fibers. Measure this off our marabou here. And I want it to cover most of the top of that shank. So again, I'm going to do the trick I always do, which is you put your thumb into it, right? And that's going to help spread that out. Now ideally, I probably would have done this on top of those marabou stacks, but I forgot. And then I'm just going to double that over. Because that stuff is pretty thick, and it has a tendency to pull out if you're not careful. So, we're being careful. So now we got a nice shiny back going over top of our conehead. Marabou for days. A big, bulky, shiny, reflectant belly on there with only one stack of marabou, so it's a little bit sparse. Cool. We're getting somewhere now. Monster dubbing. I really like this stuff. I used to tie with wool a lot, and this is very wool-like. It's from alpaca. The main dubbing part of this is alpaca from the laughing fly. So it's a really nice, natural, kind of viscous dubbing, which I like a lot. And what we're going to do is, this is kind of a custom job here. This is chartreuse blended with black. The reason why I like this one is it gives it an olive texture, right? It blends in with our olive really well. But the chartreuse fibers are fluorescent, so it adds just another layer of depth to that. I'll show you real quick. You can see the chartreuse fibers are fluorescent, so it gives it a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of secretness. So that's what we got going on. This is black monster dub blended with chartreuse monster dub. And because we're only going to do one stack on top, so I'm going to do a relatively dense stack up here and one stack on the bottom. Now I'm going to tie this in, probably not 50-50, I'm going to tie this in 60-40 so that it bleeds into our marabou, right? Everything's about your taper. The taper is like the most important part of a fly. So I have 60% going back, 40% in the front, so that when this gets doubled over, I have tips bleeding into marabou, bleeding into marabou, bleeding into hackle. It's all about this nice fusiform silhouette, right? It's very fishy, fusiform. Perfect. Hey, we got the perfect amount. So again, I'm going to do about 60-40 with my white here. Catching that. It's a little bit on my side. I'm going to take both fibers and just kind of wiggle it over towards me a little bit. Pinch it and cinch it down again. Then I'm going to walk my thread up to the eye. And whip finish. Sweet. We're going to pick this out and get any loose fibers out of there, get any trapped fibers to open up. Preen out this bottom section. And then something that I've started doing lately, I didn't used to like this. I didn't like kind of fly tying with markers, if you will. I always like to do it with dubbing. Like if I wanted a color transition or something, I'd blend dubbing, or I'd do a whole bunch of little stacks of dubbing, but markers are just more efficient. So I'm going to give this a little bloody orange throat because I think it looks really sweet. And I'm just using a straight up Sharpie. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit my side of this all the way back to the cone. And what you can do is you can really kind of overdo it, and then you can take the wet dubbing and just kind of bleed it back so you get a good fade. Then you can take some loose straws, because I don't want a super clean line up here, right? So we're just finger blending that ink back a little bit. Cool. Now, here's the secret part, right? We're going to hide that, all that, with a little conehead. Boom. Not a conehead, a fish mask. I'm so out of it this morning. I should really wait for the coffee to kick in before I film videos. I think that's what I'll do next time. So something that I like to do is I like to just put a thread dam in front of this mask to help add some pressure against that cone head and to make sure that it can never really come unseated. And what I'm using is a monofilament tying thread, which I have for tying kind of bucktail bugs. But I like it because it's nice and clear, and I can put kind of a hard coat over it and you won't really see it. It's not like having a white or a black nose up front, right, which would happen if I was to use my thread. So, I got a nice thread dam up front. This looks a little crazy right now. So I'm coming in here with some 6mm, right, they're a size smaller than the mask, living eyes and fire. Now the reason why is this is a relatively small fly. I do like big eyes. I normally put 7mm on here, but figured what the hey. So the only thing is just make sure that these are centered, obviously, because they're not going to self-center because they don't really fill up the mask. So we got a nice, slightly smaller eye than the fish mask, a little bit more proportionate to the size of this bait fish pattern. And I just used a gel super glue to hold those in place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come in over top with some UV resin. This is Deer Creek's UV Diamond Fine Flex, right? And all the Deer Creek UV resins are tack-free, like legitimately. It's not like something they say. It's actually tack-free, which is something that I think is pretty slick, because when you got to tie like a dozen flies or something, or 24 flies for an order or something like that, and every single one of these comes out tack-free, it's like hallelujah, you know what I mean? So I'm going to epoxy fill in this mask all the way around that eye. I have some bubbles in there. You can take a lighter, I don't want that, and touch it down, and that'll get those bubbles out of there. Just make sure you don't set your fly on fire. And then we're going to cure those eyes into place. So there you have it, the Marabou Minnow. Yeah, a little jiggy, hidden cone head, fish mask, bait fish. Got a little flash back, got a little flash belly, got some lateral lines, a little bloody throat. Yep. So check it out. Check it out.